The fact that they're willing to tell you, like, don't believe your lying eyes is a bit insulting, I think.
He is not going to take Greenland by force.
Nice. What a win.
Definitely think that he deserves that Peace Prize,
He referred to it, though, in his speech as Iceland a couple of times,
which
which,
seems like a projection.
yeah, he's got ice on the brain, I guess.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Washed Up. I'm Abby, and this is Colin. You're watching episode 38, and we're reporting on the news so that you don't have to watch the legacy media that your grandparents do.
And we are here in DC on the ground covering the latest news. Obviously, stuff is continuing to happen in Minneapolis, which we'll touch on a little bit. But most of this episode, we're going to be focusing on stuff going on abroad, especially in Davos this past week.
And our last episode, episode 37, was actually our most viewed long form content episode. I think it has 1K views right now and definitely the most amount of comments on it.
Yeah,
34, 35
and
maybe.
I guess before we get going here, it'd probably be good to address some of those because obviously it was a very sensitive topic that we were talking about last week with Minneapolis. Started off with the shooting of Renee Good and kind of escalated from there. It's still continuing to escalate as more people are now taking to the streets in protest. And a lot of the comments that we got seemed, from my view, to not really be in response to our video itself, but rather people are bringing in their anger about the situation and their frustration and just kind of venting it, spewing it out on our comments, which is fine. Like, if we can be that venue for people.
Totally. I thought that a lot of the comments were maybe a projection of what people are feeling because in our videos and in reporting, I think that we try our best to give, like multiple perspectives. Obviously, we're very straight up about also the subjective viewpoints that we have too. I think it says something to be honest about that as well. And it was really interesting scrolling through some of these comments.
I wanted to try a little bit of an experiment here where I think some of the comments we got were legitimately people who had actually watched the video and they were pulling out specific pieces of what we had said and commenting on that. But a lot of them were just kind of, again, visceral, reactive, not related to anything that we had even said in the video. So if you are going to leave us a kind of aggressive or even just angry or even neutral comment, we request that you sign it off with the word potato so that we know that you've actually watched the video and are not just venting.
Or if you're not just a bot. That was another theory that I think was going around. Because even when we looked at the statistics, like a lot of people, Americans are against ICE on both sides of the spectrum. So I just thought it was really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And to your point about it, a lot of it being projection as well. Um, at a certain point, reading our comments, it didn't even really, it wasn't landing with me because I was like, again, this doesn't feel like it's in response to anything that we actually said. And there's a quote, some people were even calling us like commies, which is really hilarious if you actually know what each of us believe on a individual level. And to show you how not communist we are, here's a quote from Adam Smith, the father of capitalism, about projection. And I think this speaks to what was going on last week in our comments. He said, whatever judgment we can form concerning them accordingly must always bear some secret reference either to what are, or to what upon a certain condition would be, or to what we imagine ought to be in the judgment of others. So essentially, he's saying, like, if you're reacting to something or passing judgment on something, it actually is something saying something about you and how you perceive the world. And again, what Abby was saying about some element of projection going on there. I've heard it also said, if you spot it, you got it. So the things that you accuse other people of are oftentimes a confession of maybe something about you that you don't want to see. Anyway,
So now we can get into our episode. But, keep leaving the comments if you want. Potato it.
we'll respond to if you sign it off with potato, then we will respond to it and take it for what it's worth because we're open to constructive feedback, just not constructive feedback.
Anyways, like you said in the beginning, we are going to talk mostly about Davos. So, the World Economic Forum took place in Davos, and I want to say that everyone is mostly talking about Trump's speech. He is not going to take Greenland by force.
Nice. What a win. Again, he's now not launched two wars in the past 2 weeks, so that's pretty good for
I
him.
definitely think that he deserves that Peace Prize.
It was good to hear that he kind of softened his tone on Greenland. He referred to it though in his speech as Iceland a couple of times,
Which
which
seems like a projection.
yeah, he's got ice on the brain, I guess. But so that caused people on Twitter to say like, well, why does he keep calling Greenland Iceland? Is he like slipping or what's going on there? Someone had Libby Dean had put on X during his WF remarks, President Trump appeared to mix up Greenland and Iceland around 3 times, which caused Caroline Levitt to respond, no, he didn't, Libby. His written remarks referred to Greenland as a piece of ice because that's what it is. You're the only one mixing anything up here.
But it's crazy because everyone saw it. Everyone saw the video. We all heard it.
Told them about Iceland. They loved me. They called me daddy, right? Last time. A very smart man said, he's our daddy. But now what I'm asking for is a piece of ice, cold and poorly located, that can play a vital role in world peace and world protection. It's a very small ask compared to what we have given them for many, many decades.
If you didn't even see the video, like I listened to it auditorily. I even like saw the transcript of Trump's speech. And this just shows me that Caroline Levitt is an outright liar.
Fortunately, I mean, this particular example on Twitter, again, the community note on it was President Trump said Iceland in his remarks multiple times when speaking in reference to Greenland. And then there's a link to the video of it. And it just goes to show you, like, they are willing to kind of lie through their teeth in service to some ends that they might have in particular. And this kind of makes me view Caroline Levitt a little bit differently. Not that she hasn't done that in the past, but this was just so obvious. We all saw the video. It's literally still up on the internet if you want to go view it right now. And the fact that they're willing to tell you, like, don't believe your lying eyes is a bit insulting, I think, to the American people.
As our ex-correspondent, what have people been responding to her? Like, do you think there are some people who are supporting Trump talking about it, or are they backing her? Like, how is everyone feeling about
I mean,
it?
it's kind of hard to deny that he slipped up and misspoke. I don't think it needs to be like a big deal. Like, yeah, if you're speaking so often and in various different capacities about a lot of different subjects, it's inevitable that you're going to say or misspeak sometimes. And I do think Trump was kind of just like a slip. It doesn't have to be this big thing, but then the press secretary kind of piling onto it saying like, yeah, don't believe what you just saw. It just, I think that's what people are reacting to strongly. And sort of like same thing with the Minneapolis situation where you had a video of what happened and people are kind of able to watch it and form their own judgments, but then you have spokespeople from the administration saying like, actually don't believe the conclusions that you're drawing from your own senses. And that is just, I mean, it's gaslighting essentially, and it's very insulting.
Insulting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see people still backing it, even though they could genuinely look up the video or genuinely read the transcript or anything like that. And, like you said, form your own opinions on it.
How do you feel about Carolyn Levitt at this point in the administration in general? Because they're about a year in now, and I feel like they're getting very comfortable in the different roles that they're in.
How do I feel about Caroline Levitt? I don't think that anyone who wants to be the US press secretary, I will hold that much, honor for, if that makes sense. Like, if you've watched our channel or like know Colin and I in general, I think that we give PR a lot of trouble.
Run for their money.
Like, I don't think that we're very big on those types of things, mostly because transparency is like one of the things that foundations of what we try to do in our reporting. Like we said at the beginning of the episode, I'm trying to be transparent in my viewpoints and also, laying out all the facts and trying to be non-biased in the most, even subjective commentary episodes. Um, I I didn't ever really like Caroline Levitt too much. I gave her the benefit of the doubt of being like a young woman and that being, I guess, quote, like an accomplishment. Not I guess, it is an accomplishment to be so young in a very prominent role like that. But she has disappointed me time and time again. This just being one of the examples of, thinking your audience is stupid. Like, the way that somebody talks to their audience, even their supporters, tells you a lot about who they think they are and a lot about how much power they think they actually hold. But like we were saying, you have your own eyes, your own ears, and your own sense to be able to sort through these things. And I don't think that I think it's insulting. Like I don't think Caroline Levitt's doing very well at her job right now.
Yeah, I totally agree. When she first got selected for that role, there was a lot of excitement around her for the reasons you mentioned. She's young and I think she's good at her job, but what her job is unfortunately PR in general just kind of is lying on behalf of whatever organization or person you're representing and spinning things in such a way that it always makes them look better. And that's sort of the opposite of journalism. It's called like the dark side, shadow side of journalism, because journalism done well does the opposite. It brings things to light that people don't want out there, if you're investigating well. But yeah, I remember I was talking to someone who's in the White House press pool last year when
Hmm.
Caroline Leavitt first got selected, and they were really excited about it because they thought like she was going to be sort of a breath of fresh air in an administration that is kind of geriatric and mixes up
Anyone
its
who
words.
anyone who's in a position of power that you're younger than 50, I'm like, wow, this is gonna be great. And it sucks that, I'm disappointed by these things.
Yeah. I guess that's all I really have to say about it. I think, again, people are getting very comfortable in their roles because we're now 1 year into the Trump administration. So whether that be Kristi Noem at DHS or Carolyn Levitt as press secretary.
I think that all these people who may be getting comfortable shouldn't be because there are, a lot of people watching, a lot that rides on it, journalists, like in an ideal world, like I think journalism is supposed to make politicians uncomfortable.
Mhm. Okay, so circling back a little bit to other stuff that happened at Davos, we both thought that the Mark Carney, who's the Prime Minister of Canada, speech was pretty interesting. Do you want to go into a little bit about why it kind of inverted some of the norms of the international system?
Yeah, I was really interested by everything he was saying. I think he was talking a lot about, you know, how the US is in power.
He was talking about the existing system that we've kind of been operating under, where the US is sort of takes on the mantle of being this kind of benevolent, like
This
savior
giver
of the
of
world.
giving to other countries and, you know, having all this power to help out others when that isn't the case. And I thought it was really interesting the way that Carney was outright going against this as a prominent figure of, a prominent figure, but also somebody who has been seen in pro-establishment situations before. I thought that was like the greatest part of the fact that he was giving this speech.
Yeah, and Abby and I both listened to this episode by Glenn Greenwald's System Update, where he did a special episode about Carney's speech specifically and why it was such a departure from how things have been. Because essentially, Carney was giving up the game, saying like, we've always taken, or the US has always taken the lead on these situations, and we've gone along to get along because it was benefiting us.
And now it's
And
like not benefiting them.
now that like Trump is kind of flipping everything on its head with making threats towards Greenland and NATO and just kind of like saber rattling more and more, it seems, it and levying tariffs against allies. Other countries like Canada, who have been our allies, are now having to reconsider their relationship and how they've deferred to the US in many cases, but are they going to continue to do so, or are they going to kind of maybe band together in opposition to the US or some other arrangement?
Hmm. I think some people could be saying things like, oh, you're only saying it now because you're not benefiting anymore from, the quote, like kindness of the US and foreign politics. But I think even saying it in general, especially as somebody who was benefiting and now isn't, is a huge step in transparency.
Yeah, I would agree. And specifically, Carney was mentioning the benevolence myth, this idea of, again, all the action we've taken abroad from like in the Middle East or in Asia, saying that we're bringing democracy or we're going to stabilize those regions or economically help them out in some way, um, oftentimes was being done because we stood to gain something, and just admitting that in a setting like the WEF was notable. That's pretty much all I got on that. There,
Hmm.
to the other end, Macron also gave a speech from France, and he was sort of presenting a unified image of the establishment, I thought, more so than Carney, who was kind of throwing the establishment under the bus.
Yeah, I saw that too. Have you seen the way that people are reacting about, I guess, either side of those things? Like, are people pro Carney or pro Macron?
Well, I think the EU is kind of confused, and rightfully so. I mean, we in the US are also pretty confused watching it from afar um, about this sort of realignment that is happening. Macron, though, is interesting because he was presenting this one image of being like a tough guy on like the global stage who's gonna maybe be like the new leader of establishment EU and stand up to Trump in that capacity. He was even like wearing these aviator sunglasses that were pretty ridiculous, and
People were memeing it.
Trump was mocking it from his speech, and someone had even said like, did Brigitte take another swat at him or something? He has like covering that up with his glasses. But then behind the scenes, there was text that emerged between Macron and Trump where Macron was offering to get the G7 together in Paris and have like dinner together, and he's calling him like my friend and this and that. So just, I think Carney was at least being more having more integrity where what he was saying on the global stage and what he was probably acting like in public by appearances so far are aligned. But Macron was presenting one image of a tough guy who's going to lead the new EU, but then behind the scenes, a little bit deferential to Trump even.
Sometimes I think people forget that politicians are always, back channeling with each other too. Like Trump leaking these texts isn't just because we're seeing it now doesn't mean it hasn't always been happening amongst many people. It's just the way that it goes, in their personal lives and in the way that they even like get information and things like that. Like I honestly think if they were to show that side of themselves, that maybe there would be some less divisiveness amongst parties or against countries or anything like that. Or I even see it on the flip side of seeing it being like more divisive, being like, why are you saying this to us, but then also hanging out with these people behind closed doors? I could see it either way, like an argument of if they should keep hiding it or if they should just outright say what they want to say.
I think you're hitting at the central tension of the entire like Davos event,
Right.
the WEF, is people look at it very skeptically because from the outside looking, yeah, outside looking in, it looks like this just gathering of elite people who are there to like hold a conference so that they can all get together in like back rooms and make these deals and negotiations that the people will never really hear about or have any say in. So from that standpoint, it feels kind of like a
It's
little bit dirty.
performative.
Yeah. It feels like almost like they're laughing at us in the speeches that they're willing to give on this from the stage, and then knowing that behind the scenes all this other stuff is happening on the ground at the same time. There are journalists who attend Davos and can kind of extract some of the strands of what might be taking place, but from your run-of-the-mill average American looking from the outside in, it just seems kind of like a bit of a cabal that we're not a part of.
Hmm. I'm sure they have certain deals and, even like probably inside jokes and things like that about the things that they're saying. I don't think that everything that's being said is super shocking to many people. Like Trump's speech, I think everyone really expected him to say things like that. And a lot of people's speeches were honestly in response to what Trump was saying too.
Yeah, and I think in Trump's speech especially, you saw a bit of like lightness and almost like flippancy. And I think it can be a bit of a jarring experience for people who are watching it because the stuff that he says on a global stage is very consequential for all of us. But in some ways, it's the person it's least consequential for is almost himself. Like he can get up there and make whatever call he wants or
He
say
could
whatever
say
he wants to
anything.
say with almost like no personal repercussions, it seems like, but then what he's saying is having this like ripple effect outward that's affecting the economic situation of billions of people worldwide. And so it's just this very raw display of influence and power that I think is difficult for any person to comprehend who's never held that power.
Hmm.
So there's a couple other instances, people giving speeches. What did you see about Zelensky and what he had to say?
Yeah, Zelensky was calling out the EU in general, talking about basically he was calling them out for not taking much action against, everything that's happening with Trump. He even cited his last year's speech talking about how everything stayed the same in the way that no one is calling him out or doing anything. And if sending soldiers to Greenland or whatever, like what message does that send to the mass people to all these countries?
I find Zelensky very interesting, given that obviously the war with Ukraine and Russia continues to drag on, and
Hmm.
it's really crazy to think we're going into what now the fourth year of
I
it.
know I feel like we always say this, but we've been covering this forever. We were sophomores in college when that started. I think I was in our advisor's media writing class, and that was one of the first articles I wrote, in terms of news. It was a reaction piece about Russia and Ukraine.
I think Russia and Ukraine is another instance where the actual situation versus the narratives around it are very different. Like I think the actuality of it is that the US is in a proxy war with Russia and Ukraine is just the proxy of it, of NATO essentially,
Hmm.
and that the NATO alliance is, funneling all these resources into Ukraine and has been for now almost 4 years. And yet this thing still continues to drag on and people are still dying over there and not a lot of progress has been made in the diplomatic front when Trump, famously said that he was going to end that war on day one of his presidency. So, where do you think we are currently with that? And do you think it's another example of maybe presenting one narrative when really there's another story going on?
Oh, definitely. I totally think they're all talking behind closed doors about where to keep going with this. Obviously, I don't think Trump ended the war on day one of his presidency, even though, didn't he say something about that too? He was like, this is over, the war's ended.
Well, they've had, Trump and Putin met in Alaska in
Yeah.
2025 and had a little like conference or whatnot, but it doesn't seem like anything has really changed. It just is in this period of like stagnancy, and again, the people of Ukraine are kind of the ones taking the brunt of all of it. And NATO as well, because our resources as an alliance have really been drained by it.
Hmm.
And, the US is kind of a primary funder of NATO. And so that does have an impact on our taxpayer money going over there. And I think it's turned a lot of people against the neoconservative pro-war agenda in the military-industrial complex because we see the ways that we're funding what is happening over there.
And I think that was a huge part of what Zelensky was saying too, about NATO being, I read at least an undertone of him accusing NATO and accusing the EU of being stagnant in this war, like you said, like talking about how there's nothing that has really changed in the last 4 years. And if he was begging for change last year and how it's the same this year.
I think a good question to ask whenever there's war is who is this benefiting the most? And I'm still
Who is it
I'm still
benefiting the most?
unclear who's benefiting. I know that the right and Trump would say that Zelensky is benefiting the most because as long as the war drags on, he can continue to remain in power and sort of even the presidency, Trump has alluded to the fact that he thinks that Zelensky is a dictator who hasn't been elected in many years because they've been in this war and haven't had an election. And so I could see that argument. Like in some ways, it does feel like the Ukrainian government, including Zelensky, is in a very, very, very perverse way benefiting from the war continuing on. But I would say they're not the only ones. I'd imagine there's interests on both the US and the Russian side that are
They're
reaping the
definitely.
benefits of this.
I always think about the pie of negotiation. If you're still in something like, I'm applying it to the war, right? Like, if you're still in something like this, everyone is reaping some type of benefit, at least those in power, I think.
I mean, that kind of goes back to what Carney was saying. Like a lot of our foreign policy decisions seems to be motivated by self-interest and not this altruism or even a principled approach. Because I think the most principled approach you could take would be one of peace. Again, it seems like that's not the motivating factor here for anyone's, which leads us to think there are other motivating factors, and some of that is above our pay grade, but we can kind of poke at it a little bit here and there and just remind people the longer this is dragging on, the more money that we're sending over there
Hmm.
and the more that other people are benefiting.
I think that Gen Z in particular, like young people on all sides of the political spectrum actually are very anti-war slash over being so overly involved in war.
Yeah, so I'm like, it's reminding me of a Ben Franklin quote. He said that there's never been a good war and there's never been a bad peace. And I think that just strikes right at the heart of it.
Hmm.
If you really are going to take a principled approach, the easiest and the most efficacious way to approach war would be a pro-peace agenda. And we've talked a lot about Trump and how he, in some ways, seems pro-peace because he doesn't always act on the impulse to go to war. He doesn't always act on the advice to go to war, which is to his credit, I think. But at the same time, we've talked about how he sometimes will start wars so that he can end it, and the optics of that.
He'll start a war, end it, and say he's ended 7 wars.
The other thing it reminds me of is in the book 1984, how one of the slogans of the party is "War is peace."
Hmm.
They have like all of these very paradoxical sayings that the party promotes to keep them in this perpetual state of war. And that was, I mean, 1984 is just a fantastic book, but one of the slogans that the party uses is that war is peace. And to me, Trump embodies that in many ways, like when he bombed Iran with Operation Midnight Hammer a couple months back. It was like, I'm going to launch a war so that I can end it, so that we can have peace and wrap this whole thing up. And unfortunately, I don't think that's how it works.
I agree with that.
Okay, anything else from Davos that you saw that you felt was relevant?
No, I think I hit all the points that I wanted to hit. Do you have anything else you wanted to talk about for Davos?
I guess we can just, I could add a couple more examples of expanding out that idea of what's happening behind closed doors versus what we're presented and how there's this contradiction at times. Um, And some people are willing to be transparent about that discrepancy, and other people try to hide the ball.
Uh-huh.
I think the US has been very refreshing in the fact that it's not hiding the ball as much as it used to, even though the stuff that they're willing to say publicly is kind of shocking and in some cases upsetting. But our Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, was talking about how we had been engaged in economic statecraft in order to sanction Iran in an attempt to try to topple that regime. And that's why in December, we saw the breakdown of kind of many of their institutions and a lot of people protesting, getting incensed, almost leading to US intervention last week and the week before. So I just thought that was interesting that Besant was out there again vocalizing what we've all kind of known to be the case, that the U.S. engages in that economic statecraft to get its way politically even, but not hiding the ball at all, just saying it.
Prefer if, I mean, maybe that's just me, but there are some people who I think say that, the government deserves to have its secrets, and there are certain things that the average American citizen shouldn't know, which I think, I don't know, I could make the argument that there probably are some things that like we shouldn't know, but I do think that politicians and, our government are supposed to be vessels for us as their constituents. So I do prefer when there's more transparency, even if it's something that I don't exactly want to hear or if it's upsetting.
That's a great point that you raised about the government acting in a paternalistic capacity, saying like, I don't think the American people are ready to know about that, or like they wouldn't be able to handle that, therefore we're going to keep it under wraps. And it seems like a lot of our intelligence operations and a lot of the stuff that goes on in the intelligence community is kind of done for that reason, like to keep
Hmm.
people insulated from truth that might be too much for them to handle. So I'm curious, like pulling on that a little bit, how do you feel about that just in general? Like, do you think it's better to tell people, well, you kind of said you think it's better to tell people up front versus hold back. But
Hmm.
are there instances you can think of where like maybe holding back is in the public's best good?
I've thought about this a lot actually, throughout my time as a journalist in college and in general, I was a political science major. I've teetered this line of, do I think that transparency for the American people is an end all be all? Like, do I think that that needs to happen in every single scenario? And for the most part, I do lean more towards that way.
Mm,
I do think, like I said, that I don't think people are as stupid as politicians or, our government may think. Like, I think Caroline Levitt's like one example of it. Like, her saying that reminds me of her viewpoint and maybe the Trump admin's viewpoint on how easy it would be to give people propaganda or manipulate people or anything like that. And I'm having trouble finding a scenario where I think, yeah, that maybe should be kept secret or anything
right.
like that.
I think we're both in agreement too, where we are very much inclined towards transparency, and that comes from having that background in journalism, where the role of a journalist, when done well, is to bring transparency, truth to the forefront, so that people can make up their own minds about things, as opposed to being told from the top down, like this is what you must believe. And in some cases, I could see there being like national security reasons why
Yeah.
you wouldn't want to disclose certain information. Like allegedly, when we took Venezuela and arrested Maduro, they had not even brought Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, into those conversations because they were trying to keep it so hush hush. They didn't want any possibility of it getting out. And for whatever reason, they had determined not to include her in the planning of some of that, to the point where her title is DNI, Director of National Intelligence. They were saying that that actually stood for Do Not Invite. And it is just this interesting thing within our federal government where they have a lot of leeway to decide like who's in on the decision making and who's out. And when you get to that high level, you can't include everyone on every decision, and that includes the American people sometimes. And I don't like it. I would much rather everyone be as aware as we possibly can be. I think the internet makes it very hard to withhold stuff from us. Politicians don't have to navigate that now because the internet just opens up this access to information we've never had before and increases the demand for transparency from the public.
It makes me wonder what it would have been like to be a young adult or grow up in an era without the internet in terms of getting information. In journalism classes and things like that, in talking about journalism too, I've mentioned this that back then, like before the internet and before social media and things like that, politicians and the political elite had to go through journalists to give their message out, and people had to trust that journalists were being as transparent and honest as they were with interviews with politicians or anything like that.
I think a lot of that faith has sort of been dashed, unfortunately. And the two drivers that I see behind it were COVID and how that kind of exposed that the information we were being presented by the establishment, the institutions, where it was not always factual or even adjacent to true. And then the second being the Epstein scandal and how that also revealed how much can go on behind the scenes without ever the public becoming aware of. But now the internet has leveled that playing field and opened up this access to information that allows even like us to do what we're doing right now, which is trying to discern and share what we discern to be true so that people can make up their own minds.
I think another driving cause of that too is, media outlets being bought out by huge conglomerates. Because you have to wonder from, like the top down, like why they're reporting on certain things, clickability, like where you can get actual good information. And by good, I mean honest information in a way that has no ulterior motive. And I do think that's a really big reason why I'm so pro doing something like this or this podcast, because I mean, like we've said, I am there's no such thing as me not participating in legacy media or, reading the Post or anything like that. Like, we have to get the information from somewhere. Um, Colin and I don't have the resources to go up to them ourselves. So I don't know.
I do think one of the biggest like awakenings that I've had in my life has been in this past year and living in DC and realizing how much people are incentivized by those ulterior motives that they're not always upfront about. And we've known about that, but even more so, I realize how big of a factor money is, and that's again also not really a shock, but our advisor used to always tell us follow the money.
She used to always say that.
And it's true. It's so true. And I would just say to any of our listeners or audience, if you really want to know what we as individuals really think, we have an entire catalog of a year's worth of us speaking off the cuff and saying what we really believe. And we have not made any money to date on anything we've said.
No, she made zero
And
money.
so the reason I make that point is there's no ulterior motive in anything that we've said up until this point, and I don't expect there to be in the future, even if we do start making money off of this in any way. And we'll always be honest with you on that in terms of where we're accepting it from and how it might bias us in different ways.
Well said.
All right, I think we can kind of wrap this up a little bit, especially the Davos part.
Hmm.
Maybe as we're concluding, could give some updates about Minneapolis. There was, obviously this is the biggest story going on right now, and I don't want it to seem like we're not talking about it. We've done 2 episodes on it now. Um, Starting with Renee Good when she was shot and killed, there's some new information emerging about what actually happened there. Her autopsy, for instance, was done, and it was concluded that it was the third shot through the side window that actually had killed her. But as of right now, the protests are ongoing. Thousands of people are out in Minneapolis, despite it being extremely, extremely cold right now. They were all in front of the airport yesterday, and there was a couple hundred people that were arrested for, in that case, it was very peaceful. There have been other instances that have now become less peaceful, which we said might happen because it was seeming to escalate.
Hmm.
And even I saw a video of people taking weapons out of the back of I think a vehicle. I'm not sure if it was ICE or just police, but people had actually broken in and started taking the weapons out, which is completely unacceptable and not a form of peaceful protest. What else have you seen recently?
I've been seeing people post a lot on social media, the different stories. I I see it amongst like old classmates and people that I know more so stories that they're like outraged by. I've been seeing this one repost that people are posting of this 5-year-old who was detained. He's like wearing this little backpack, and everyone had been reposting it talking about how unacceptable that was. But yeah, that's
There
everyone's
was
just on
very
social
competing
media.
narratives about even that as well.
Yeah.
The image was very evocative because it just showed like a 5-year-old boy with his backpack. And that's a very evocative image, but at the same time, there was competing information about what was actually going on. Some people were saying his parents were from Ecuador, his father had run off and left the kid there, and so ICE was actually trying to step in some capacity to like not necessarily take care of, but like literally just figure out where to bring the kid and how to try to bring him back to his mother. I heard they knocked on her door and she was not responding to the door, which people then say, well, obviously she's not
Like
going to
she
do
didn't
that
want
if
to
she's
respond.
from, yeah, if she's worried about deportation. So it's just been this complete morass of information about what is happening, and it just seems like a very chaotic situation in Minneapolis right now.
I hope everyone in Minneapolis stays safe. Um, Seeing all those images of everyone outside, it's just crazy to see how many people are out. It's really cold out too, like you mentioned. And I'm hoping that there's no more further escalation, just for everyone's general, just for everyone's general safety.
Right. I mean, I can't say how many times we said last episode, like, if you are going to protest, keep it peaceful. Because if you aren't acting peacefully, then it gives the other side ammunition against you to, point fingers and say, like, you're deranged and look at how the leftists want to destroy our civilization and this and that. When really you might have the best of intentions and you might just be out there because you don't like what's happening and don't think our taxpayer money should be funding it.
Which is so valid to me. Forms of protest. I mean, that's one of our rights, like the peaceful protest aspect of it. And I think that people are angry, but to remember, I really like what you said about giving ammunition to the other side. Like, I don't think any form of escalation will do us any good in that scenario.
There was one other incident I think is relevant to bring up where a bunch of anti-ICE protesters went into a church and disrupted the service there, and then the DOJ brought charges against three of them and arrested three of them this past week. I'm not going to give you the full breakdown of that. Go listen to Megyn Kelly's show. She did a full rundown of that situation if you are interested in it. But again, it was stoking both sides once again, where people who are very anti-us are saying, look at how the DOJ is bringing these trumped up charges against people for protesting. And then the other side, the right-leaning side, was saying, how dare they go into a place of worship and violate those people's First Amendment right to worship and freedom of religion. And so it was just an interesting situation where those freedom of protest and expression was coming up against freedom of religion. And in my view, my understanding of the law in that situation, the freedom to worship comes first. You cannot engage in conspiracy against rights to violate someone's freedom to worship. And I think it's unacceptable to go into churches to disrupt things in that way. I don't love the idea of the DOJ targeting protesters and bringing really extreme charges against them, but
Yeah.
if the evidence is there and the fact supports that they were engaging in conspiracy against rights, then you know, the people who engaged in that protest, they're gonna essentially face whatever consequences of that they might have brought upon themselves. Anywho, I think that's about it for Minneapolis at the moment, but it is evolving and we'll continue to do our best to bring you updates.
And keyword evolving, I think that's another thing that sometimes people forget this when episodes are filmed and that stories do change very fast.
I mean, we even try to put in our video description on what day we record some things. If you are watching a video and have any level of care about thoughtfully engaging with it, you can always check when something was published, and that will give you the context that you sometimes need before commenting. Again, if people just want to spout off and vent, like feel free to do that too. Maybe we can get a back and forth conversation actually going in our own comment section, but always checking when something was filmed or posted is helpful, relevant context, I think, in an
Hmm.
evolving story such as this.
Agreed. Okay, I think we're all done for
Yep.
this week. Washed
Washed
up
about.
out.